The tall oak doors of the Nashville courtroom creaked open, revealing Pam Bondi as she stepped into the hushed space. Her heels clicked softly against the polished marble floor as she approached the defense table, her posture straight, exuding quiet confidence. The dim light of the antique chandeliers above cast a subtle glow, illuminating the sleek folds of her navy blazer. But it wasn't her poise or professionalism that first caught Judge William Crow's attention. Seated high on the bench, Judge Crow's sharp eyes immediately zeroed in on the object resting just below her neck, a delicate silver cross that glinted faintly with each step she took. His piercing stare lingered, narrowing slightly as his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't even glance at the folder of case details lying in front of him. His focus remained fixed on the small religious emblem, as if it were an affront to his domain. Pam set down her briefcase and gave a composed nod in his direction, seemingly unaware of the scrutiny her cross was drawing. She adjusted the papers in front of her as the faint rustle of movement from the gallery settled into silence. The room was a mix of muted colors and tension, the shuffle of documents, the scratch of pens, and the quiet murmur of curiosity from the few spectators who sensed something unusual brewing. Judge Crow finally broke the silence, his voice sharp and commanding. "Ms. Bondi," he began, his tone already laced with disapproval. "Before we begin this hearing, there is a matter that must be addressed." Pam looked up calmly, her expression polite and professional. "Yes, Your Honor?" The judge leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him. His eyes never wavered from the cross. "That," he said, gesturing pointedly, "is an inappropriate display in this courtroom." The gallery stiffened, the faint creak of seats echoing as heads turned toward her. Pam's hand instinctively brushed against the cross, her brow furrowing slightly in confusion. "Excuse me, Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady. "That cross," Judge Crow clarified, his tone curt, "it is a religious symbol, and I will not have overt displays of faith disrupting the neutrality of this courtroom." The weight of his words rippled through the room, triggering a murmur of disbelief among the few in attendance. Pam's expression remained calm, though her eyes sharpened with quiet determination. "Your Honor, this cross is a personal emblem. It is neither disruptive nor intended to make any statement about these proceedings." Crow's gavel came down with a sharp crack, silencing the whispers. "Ms. Bondi, this is not a debate. Remove it, or I will fine you for contempt." Pam straightened, her composure unwavering. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I must decline. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees my right to freedom of religious expression." Crow smirked, the expression cold and condescending. "Ms. Bondi, the First Amendment does not give you the right to ignore courtroom decorum. You will comply, or you will be fined." Pam's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but her voice remained even. "Your Honor, I believe such a fine would constitute a violation of my constitutional rights. I intend to challenge any penalty imposed on those grounds." The tension in the room thickened as the judge's smirk deepened. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the gavel lightly against the bench. "Fine," he said with mock finality. "You leave me no choice. I am issuing a $1,000 fine for contempt of court." The gallery erupted into hushed whispers and gasps. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching against their notepads as they documented the unexpected confrontation. Pam stood her ground, her calm resolve unshaken. She glanced briefly at the gallery, noting the mix of shock and curiosity reflected in their expressions. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "I will be filing a motion to appeal this fine. Furthermore, I will be citing Church of Lukumi Babalu IV, City of Hialeah, 1993, which explicitly protects against discriminatory actions targeting religious practices." Crow's smirk turned into a full, sardonic smile. "By all means, Ms. Bondi, quote all the cases you like. But in this courtroom, my ruling stands." Pam's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze steady as she met his mocking eyes. "Then I look forward to presenting my case, Your Honor." The tension in the room was electric as the proceedings shifted back to the tenant rights hearing. Yet, The earlier exchange lingered like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the entire courtroom. It was clear to everyone in attendance that this battle was far from over. And for Pam Bondi, it had only just begun. Pam Bondi sat motionless at the defense table, her fingers resting lightly on the silver cross that had ignited such an unexpected uproar. The courtroom shifted uneasily, a ripple of disbelief and tension flowing through the gallery as Judge William Crowe sat high on his bench, seemingly basking in his own authority. "Ms. Bondi," he said with a smirk, his tone laced with condescension, "if you're so certain that the First Amendment is your shield, I encourage you to fight this. But mark my words, this is my courtroom, and I will not tolerate insubordination." Pam's gaze never wavered. "Your Honor, I have every intention of defending not only my rights but the principles enshrined in our Constitution. I respectfully submit that this fine represents a fundamental overreach." Crowe let out a short, sardonic laugh. "Fundamental overreach, you say? Let me remind you, Ms. Bondi, that this courtroom is a place of law, not a church or a forum for personal displays." His gavel struck again, punctuating his words with a resounding crack that echoed through the room. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder, and the tension climbed higher. Pam adjusted her stance, her voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, freedom of religion is not confined to places of worship. The First Amendment guarantees that no public authority, including a court of law, may infringe upon an individual's right to express their faith." She paused, allowing her words to hang in the charged silence. "This cross," she added, gesturing to the silver emblem at her neck, "does not hinder the proceedings. It does not interfere with the application of the law. But this fine, Your Honor, sets a dangerous precedent." Crowe leaned back in his chair, his expression one of feigned indifference. "Dangerous precedent? This is hardly the forum for such dramatic claims, Ms. Bondi. Frankly, I find your argument as flimsy as your choice to wear that symbol here." The sharpness of his words drew audible gasps from the gallery. Several onlookers leaned forward, anticipation flickering in their eyes. Pam, however, remained unflinching, her resolve etched into every line of her face. "With respect, Your Honor," she countered, her voice steady, "your ruling does not align with constitutional law or judicial precedent. The landmark case Church of Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah, 1993, established that governmental actions which target specific religious practices are inherently discriminatory. This fine, issued solely in response to my wearing of this cross, falls squarely into that category." The judge's smirk faltered momentarily, though he quickly masked it with a dismissive wave of his hand. "We're not here to debate Supreme Court rulings, Ms. Bondi. Perhaps you'd prefer to grandstand at a legal seminar. But in this courtroom, my decision stands." Pam inclined her head slightly, her expression calm but unyielding. "Then I will file my motion to appeal without delay, Your Honor. I trust the appellate court will have a different view." The gallery buzzed with renewed whispers, and Crowe's expression darkened. He leaned forward, his tone dropping to a low, ominous growl. "You're bold, Ms. Bondi. I'll give you that. But you may find that boldness has its consequences." For a moment, their gazes locked in a battle of wills, Pam's steely determination against Crowe's thinly veiled hostility. Finally, the judge straightened, the smirk returning to his lips. "Proceed with the case," he said curtly, gesturing toward the file before him. "But don't think for a moment that this matter is over." The hearing resumed, but the earlier exchange lingered in the air like an unresolved storm. Pam navigated the tenant rights arguments with her usual precision, but she could feel the weight of Crowe's eyes on her, his disapproval a constant presence. He was testing her, pushing boundaries, but Pam had no intention of yielding. By the following morning, Crowe escalated the battle further. A formal complaint, filed directly with the State Bar Association, accused Pam of defiance and unprofessional conduct. The news spread quickly, triggering waves of speculation and debate across Nashville's legal circles. Pam read the complaint with a measured calm, her mind already working through the next steps. She knew this was no longer just about her. It was about the principles she stood for and the rights she was determined to defend. And as the story began to draw the attention of journalists and civil rights advocates, she realized this fight had the potential to reach far beyond the courtroom. The bar complaint against Pam Bondi had lit a firestorm that spread beyond the confines of the courtroom. What began as an internal legal dispute quickly became a public spectacle, drawing the attention of local media outlets, national journalists, and civil rights advocates alike. Articles surfaced with provocative headlines like "Faith on Trial," "Attorney Challenges Judge Over Religious Freedom," and "Pam Bondi Fights Back Against Alleged Courtroom Bias." The story struck a chord, resonating with people on both sides of the debate. Pam, however, remained calm amidst the storm. She sat in her office, reviewing the complaint Judge William Crowe had filed. It was full of inflammatory accusations, claiming she had undermined courtroom decorum, disrespected judicial authority, and intentionally disrupted proceedings. Yet, as she read through the document, a steely determination took root within her. Every line of the complaint only reinforced what she already knew. This wasn't about professionalism. This was about silencing her and her faith. Across her desk lay a growing pile of support letters from legal colleagues, community leaders, and even strangers who had heard about her case. Many shared their own stories of being marginalized for their beliefs, thanking her for standing firm. Civil liberties organizations reached out, offering assistance and legal resources. Meanwhile, Pam's own team worked tirelessly to prepare for the battle ahead. She looked up as her paralegal, Emma, entered the room holding a stack of documents. "Here are the case records you requested," Emma said, setting them down. "We've compiled Judge Crowe's prior rulings where similar actions were taken against attorneys or witnesses wearing religious symbols." Pam picked up the first file, flipping through it quickly. "Excellent work," she said. "This is exactly what we need to show his pattern of targeting religious expression." Emma hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Pam, have you seen the latest headlines? There's a lot of media coverage now. People are starting to take sides." Pam glanced at the news notifications piling up on her phone but didn't pick it up. "Good," she said simply. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about challenging a misuse of power." Her strategy was clear. She would not only appeal the fine but also file a counterclaim, alleging judicial overreach and violation of her constitutional rights. To strengthen her case, she would leverage 3 critical pieces of evidence. Archived rulings. Pam's team had unearthed several instances where Judge Crowe had issued questionable fines or made dismissive comments toward those wearing religious symbols in his courtroom. The records painted a damning picture of consistent bias. Colleague testimonies. Fellow attorneys who had experienced or witnessed Crowe's behavior came forward, willing to testify about his attempts to censor expressions of faith in court. Legal precedents. Pam meticulously compiled constitutional analyses and case law, including the pivotal Church of Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah decision, to demonstrate that Crowe's actions violated protected rights. As she reviewed the materials, Emma spoke again. "Pam, with all due respect, why are you putting yourself through this? A lot of people would have paid the fine and moved on." Pam paused, her expression thoughtful. "Because it's not about the money, Emma. It's about principle. If we let these small violations go unchecked, they snowball into something larger. And one day, someone else who doesn't have the same resources I do will face this same fight. I can't stand by and let that happen." Emma nodded, clearly moved by Pam's conviction. "Well, you're not fighting alone. We're all behind you." Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the public conversation grew louder. News outlets aired heated debates between legal analysts. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like #FaithAndFreedom and #PamBondi versus Crowe. Advocacy groups issued statements condemning judicial overreach, while others argued for stricter courtroom neutrality. The court of public opinion was split, but Pam knew one thing for certain. When she walked back into that courtroom, she would be armed not only with evidence but also with the unwavering belief that justice was on her side. The courtroom was electric with anticipation as Pam Bondi prepared to file her counterclaim against Judge William Crowe. What had begun as a contentious exchange over a simple cross had now escalated into a broader reckoning about judicial overreach and constitutional rights. The glare of the media spotlight only amplified the stakes, turning this into a case that transcended the boundaries of Nashville's legal circuit. Pam stood resolutely in front of the evidence table, her cross still proudly displayed against the backdrop of her navy blazer. Across the courtroom, Judge Crow sat stiffly on the bench, his expression as stern as ever but with a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. The relentless scrutiny had clearly begun to weigh on him. Before the proceedings began, a group of reporters had gathered outside the courthouse, microphones and cameras poised for breaking updates. Civil liberties advocates mingled with curious onlookers, holding signs that read, "Faith and freedom for all," and "End judicial bias." Pam stepped to the center of the courtroom, holding a thick file of documents in her hand. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but commanding, "I am filing a formal counterclaim alleging judicial overreach and violation of my constitutional rights, including but not limited to those protected under the First Amendment." Crow's gavel came down with a sharp crack, though his voice was more measured than before. "Ms. Bondi, this court is here to resolve disputes, not entertain theatrics." "With respect, Your Honor," Pam replied, "this is not theater. It is a necessary response to actions that have infringed upon my rights and set a dangerous precedent. I intend to present evidence to substantiate these claims." The gallery erupted in whispers, the tension escalating as Pam handed her motion to the bailiff. Judge Crow shifted uncomfortably, flipping through the pages before him with an air of forced nonchalance. Pam turned back to the court, her confidence unshaken. "Your Honor, the evidence I'm about to present highlights a clear pattern of judicial bias, specifically targeting expressions of faith in this courtroom. This evidence includes records of past rulings, testimonies from colleagues, and legal analyses supporting my claim." The first piece of evidence was introduced, archived court records revealing several instances where Judge Crow had issued fines or warnings to individuals displaying religious symbols, often citing vague violations of courtroom decorum. As these records were read aloud, murmurs rippled through the gallery, and even the jury appeared unsettled by the emerging pattern. Next came the testimonies. Pam called upon attorneys and court staff who described Crow's frequent attempts to silence or penalize displays of faith. A young attorney recounted being reprimanded for wearing a small Star of David pin, while another witness described how Crow had once berated a defendant for referencing prayer during their testimony. As the testimonies continued, Crow's usual stoic demeanor began to crack. His lips tightened, and a faint flush crept up his neck. He interrupted occasionally, objecting to the relevance of certain statements, but Pam countered each time with precision and calm. "Your Honor," Pam said firmly, addressing both Crow and the court, "these testimonies and records illustrate a consistent effort to suppress religious expression under the guise of maintaining neutrality. This is not neutrality, it is discrimination." Crow opened his mouth to respond, but Pam didn't pause. She reached for her final piece of evidence, a detailed legal analysis comparing his actions to the rulings outlined in Church of Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah. She explained how the precedent underscored the illegality of targeting specific religious practices without justification. "This case is about more than my cross," she concluded, her voice resonating with conviction. "It is about safeguarding the constitutional rights of every individual who steps into this courtroom. No judge, no matter how esteemed, is above the law." The room was silent, every eye fixed on Pam as her words echoed in the tense air. Even Judge Crow seemed momentarily at a loss for words, his normally sharp retorts tempered by the weight of her argument. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had swelled. Advocacy groups issued statements in support of Pam, and social media erupted with hashtags like #StandWithPamBondi and #ProtectReligiousFreedom. The case had captured the nation's attention, becoming a rallying cry for those who believed in the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution. Inside the courtroom, the pressure on Crow mounted. His authority, once unshakable, was now being scrutinized under a glaring spotlight. Pam had not only presented an airtight case but had also galvanized public opinion, leaving him with little room to maneuver. As the proceedings concluded for the day, the judge's gavel came down with less force than usual. His parting words were curt. "This court will reconvene tomorrow to deliberate further." Pam gathered her papers, the faintest smile touching her lips as she exited the courtroom to a wave of flashing cameras and questions shouted by reporters. Her focus, however, remained unshaken. She knew the fight was far from over, but she also knew she had taken a significant step forward in holding Judge Crow accountable for his actions. The courtroom was hushed as Pam Bondi walked in the next morning, the weight of the previous day's proceedings hanging heavily in the air. The gallery was packed. Reporters, legal observers, and citizens eager to witness what was quickly becoming one of the most significant legal battles in Nashville's recent history. Judge William Crow, who usually entered the courtroom with an air of complete authority, now seemed a touch more subdued. The mounting pressure and public scrutiny had clearly left their mark. Pam stood at the defense table, her silver cross catching the light as she adjusted the papers before her. She exuded calm determination, prepared for whatever the day would bring. The public spectacle and media attention had only strengthened her resolve, as did the hundreds of messages of support she had received. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about standing up for fundamental rights. Judge Crow banged his gavel, his voice steady but lacking its usual edge. "This court will now continue deliberations on Ms. Bondi's counterclaim." Pam rose smoothly and approached the podium, her voice clear and confident. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to summarize the key points of my argument before we move forward." Crow gave a reluctant nod. "Proceed." Pam began, her tone both firm and respectful. "Your Honor, this case is about more than a single fine. It's about the constitutional rights guaranteed to every American citizen. The evidence we've presented clearly shows a pattern of actions that target religious expression under the guise of courtroom decorum. Such actions are not only unjust but also unconstitutional." She gestured toward the evidence table. "The court records, the testimonies, and the legal precedents we've submitted demonstrate that this fine was not an isolated incident but part of a broader pattern of bias. And bias has no place in a court of law." Crow's fingers tapped lightly against the bench, his expression unreadable. Pam paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "In addition to appealing the fine, I am calling for an independent review of these practices to ensure fairness and equality for all individuals who enter this courtroom." The gallery murmured in agreement, the whispers growing louder until Crow's gavel came down sharply. "Order," he barked, though his voice lacked its usual force. Pam returned to her seat, her posture relaxed but her focus unwavering. She could feel the tension radiating from Crow, who now appeared to be grappling with the weight of the evidence and the public attention surrounding the case. After what felt like an eternity, Crow leaned forward, clasping his hands together. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than usual, almost reflective. "Ms. Bondi, your arguments have been compelling. The evidence you've presented has raised serious questions, not only about the fine in question but also about the integrity of this courtroom." The gallery held its collective breath, the silence stretching out as Crow's words hung in the air. Finally, he reached for his gavel, his tone measured and deliberate. "I hereby rescind the fine issued to Ms. Bondi. Furthermore, I acknowledge that my actions may have overstepped the boundaries of judicial neutrality." The room erupted into applause, the sound filling the space as spectators, reporters, and even some court staff reacted to the unexpected outcome. Pam's expression remained composed, but a glimmer of satisfaction shone in her eyes. Crow's gavel came down again, signaling for silence. "This court is adjourned," he said simply, standing and exiting the bench without another word. His retreat was swift, and for the first time, he appeared less like an unshakable authority figure and more like a man humbled by his own misjudgment. As Pam gathered her belongings, she turned to see Emma beaming from the gallery. "You did it," Emma whispered, her voice full of admiration. Pam smiled softly, her hand brushing against the cross at her neck. "We did it," she replied. "And this is just the beginning." As the courtroom emptied and the sound of echoing applause faded into quiet murmurs, Pam Bondi lingered for a moment, her hand brushing against the cross she had so fiercely defended. The victory resonated deeply, not only because of the personal significance but also because of the broader implications for justice and freedom. Outside the courthouse, the sun shone brightly, as if reflecting the triumph of the moment. A crowd of supporters and reporters waited on the steps, eager to hear from the woman who had stood her ground against judicial overreach. Pam adjusted her blazer, her composure as steady as ever, before stepping into the sea of cameras and microphones. One of the reporters leaned forward, voice ringing above the noise. "Ms. Bondi, what does this victory mean to you? And what message do you hope it sends?" Pam paused, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "This victory isn't just about me or the fine," she said, her voice carrying strength and conviction. "It's about the principles that form the foundation of our justice system: freedom, fairness, and the right to stand by our beliefs. No one, no matter their position of power, is above the Constitution." The crowd erupted in cheers, the energy palpable. Pam continued, her tone softening slightly as she addressed the broader audience. "We must remain vigilant in protecting our rights, no matter how small the battle may seem. This case was never just about a cross. It was about ensuring that everyone, regardless of their faith, is treated with dignity and respect in a court of law." As Pam descended the courthouse steps, a young woman approached her, clutching a small notebook. "Ms. Bondi," she began hesitantly, "I just wanted to say thank you. I've always been afraid to stand up for what I believe, but seeing what you did, it's inspiring." Pam smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on the woman's shoulder. "Courage starts with one small step," she said. "You're stronger than you realize." Later that evening, Pam sat in her office, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The silver cross, which had sparked such controversy, now felt like a symbol of resilience and purpose. It reminded her not only of her faith but also of the unyielding commitment to justice that had guided her throughout her career. Looking out at the city lights, Pam whispered to herself, "This was just one fight, but it won't be the last. As long as there's a principle to defend, I'll be there." And with that, she turned back to her work, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This final part ties together Pam's triumph, her reflections on faith and justice, and her unwavering resolve to protect fundamental rights. I hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts about it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new and equally exciting stories. See you in the next video.